James Harden is there's reports coming out of James Harden. I think he might miss this game because of COVID protocols. He was at a club and all this. We know that there's been a lot of dysfunction with the Rockets and James Harden to start out this year. And I think it's in everybody's best interest if James Harden just gets traded like he wants to. But, of course, the Rockets have to get value for him in order for him to get traded. So in this segment, we're going to put together our best trade packages for James Harden. I actually have four potential teams that can trade for him. I'll go first in talking about the Miami Heat.
What's your 4 teams before you go?
The Heat, the Sixers, the Nets, and the Raptors.
Gotcha.
So I think the Miami Heat, one of the trade packages I see is that the Heat get James Harden and PJ Tucker. I think a lot of these trade packages you should add in. You should want to ask for PJ Tucker just because he's a glue guy. He's James Harden's best friend. He's a BR Kicks champion. So I think Miami Heat get James Harden, they get PJ Tucker, and the Rockets get Tyler Hero, Kendrick Nunn, Kelly Olynyk, and a future first-round pick.
That's not a bad. I would take that in a heartbeat if I was the Heat, just talent-wise.
And the Heat have also said that they have stopped talking with the Rockets because I believe the Rockets are asking for Bam as well.
And that's one of the biggest problems, before we keep going into trade packages with the Rockets, is they're asking for so much. And with everything that James Harden has done and said over the past few months, if you had tried to pull this off at the beginning of last season, I think you would get more of the value that you're looking for. But with everything, all the antics and whatever's come out over the past few months, his trade value has just plummeted, not as a player, but just as a guy you want or don't want in your locker room.
And the Rockets should just be happy with getting a young star, honestly. Just get a young star, but they're asking for too much. They want Hero and Bam. You're not going to get that. You should be fine with just getting Hero and Kendrick Nunn in the pick. I think that would be a perfect deal for both sides.
Yeah. My first team that I think would have a pretty solid chance of trading for him is the Denver Nuggets. And I'm not sure exactly how they would make the money match, but with Gary Harris's big contract, you could match that with a guy like Michael Porter Jr. and maybe one of those nice bench pieces and a couple of picks. I think that would be a solid deal. The Rockets are able to bring in a guy like Michael Porter Jr., who I think he has all-star potential easily. It's just he needs to get the minutes and get the touches, and I don't think he'll necessarily get that in Denver behind Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. And the Nuggets add a guy in James Harden who would just add another versatile scoring option to that offense.
Wow, that's a good one. I don't know. That's weird. That's a weird fit with Harden and Murray.
And they had been one of the names that have been floated around recently. I think a report came out 2 days ago that the Nuggets, the Raptors, and the Celtics had inquired about him. But there was just preliminary talks.
Wow, that would be a good. Maybe I think if I'm the Nuggets, I'll do the best I can to keep Porter Jr.
Yeah,
and instead put like Bol in the deal.
That would be an interesting piece to
like
throw in there.
Bol in the deal, and I'll throw in some picks. But that's interesting. The next team I have is the 76ers. This is an easy deal. I think the Rockets get James Harden. I mean, the Sixers get James Harden, and the Rockets get Ben Simmons and 2 first-round picks. You can't ask for too much when you're getting an all-NBA defender and a consistent all-star in Ben Simmons when you're trading for a disgruntled superstar. The Rockets do not have the leverage to ask for anything else in a deal with the Philadelphia 76ers. And the 76ers have said that, why are we going to give you all of our assets when we know your player wants to leave regardless?
Yeah.
So, if you can get Ben Simmons out of the deal, a star player, you do it. And if you're getting picks on top of that, you do it. You don't try to ask for so much more.
Yeah, and I'll go with a similar deal. Now that you said the Sixers, I'll also say the Sixers. Ben Simmons going. And then I would also add in one of those guards that they have in that rotation. Maybe a guy like Shake Milton, now that they have Tyrese Maxey that can slide in
point guard role too.
And can bring in a point guard for the Rockets. So I think that would be a good deal for both. And you would have to attach maybe 2 first-round picks to it. But I think that would be a good deal. Keep the Rockets in contention, and the Sixers get the guy that fits so much better in that offense with a guy like Joel Embiid, and that automatically makes them more of a contender in the East in my eyes.
So the next team I have is, of course, the Brooklyn Nets. I have the Nets getting James Harden and PJ Tucker, and I have the Rockets getting Karis LeVert, Jared Allen, Taurean Prince, and Bruce Brown. Bruce Brown, who's not going to get any minutes for the Nets, I think on a team like the Rockets can be their 3-and-D wing defender. He's not that good of a three-point shooter, but he could be their wing defender. And just a young guy that you can possibly put in the rotation or not. But I think Karis LeVert automatically becomes their starting 2 guard. He has all-star potential. Jared Allen can be the backup center or starting center. You can play Christian Wood, Jared Allen, Eric Gordon, Karis LeVert, and John Wall. I think that would be a good team. You'd have depth with Taurean Prince coming off the bench as well. And you get I think, the Nets could trade those players in a first round or second round pick. I don't think they need to put in so many picks, but I think this deal makes sense for both teams. Karis LeVert can be an all-star if he gets the touches, and the Rockets will still be competitive, and they'll be getting picks for the future. So at this point, the Rockets just have to look to get some players in return because for James Harden, picks are not going to do it. You need a player as well.
Yeah, out of all the deals that I've heard with the Nets, that might be the one that I like the most just because you keep your picks, you keep a guy like Dinwiddie, so even if the worst case scenario, everything blows up in your face, you still have some pieces that you can build around there. So
I don't think sorry to cut you off, but I don't think the Nets will trade LeVert, Allen, and Dinwiddie.
I agree.
I think it's 2 of those guys. Same thing with the Lakers and the Pelicans when they dealt for Anthony Davis. They traded Lonzo and Ingram. They didn't trade Lonzo, Ingram, and Kuzma.
Yeah.
It's going to be 2 of the 3 guys. It's not going to be all 3.
Yeah, I agree with you. And this next one I saw was kind of interesting. And I don't know if the money would match. I made my own changes to it, but I have the Warriors giving up Wiggins and Wiseman for Harden and Tucker, and maybe they need some picks to match that and throw in a player to match the money, but I think that would be a good deal for the Warriors. You bring in Harden, who gives you that second scoring guard that they're lacking without Clay in the rotation, and for the Rockets you get a guy in, I don't even want to say Wiggins is that much of a great asset, but Wiggins is a solid player, and then more importantly you get Wiseman, who was a second overall pick, has all the potential in the world. I think that would be a good value to get back for a guy like James Harden.
If I'm being honest, if I'm the Rockets and I hear a Warriors offer and they're offering me Wiggins, I'm hanging up the phone. I'm not even going to entertain the conversation. But my next team is, I think, the Toronto Raptors. I have 2 trade packages for the Rockets and the Raptors. The Raptors would get James Harden, PJ Tucker, and DeMarcus Cousins. The Rockets will get Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, and 2 first-round picks. I think the Rockets get a young star in Pascal. They get a guy in Fred VanVleet who could score 20 points per game. And the Raptors get Tucker, Harden, and maybe you don't even have to throw in Cousins. I think Cousins just makes the salaries work. But I think just Harden and Tucker would work. And I think this would be a good deal for both sides. Toronto gets that superstar because even though Pascal is a good player, he's not that superstar. The next package I have for the Raptors is just Harden for Siakam and Norman Powell, straight up. Harden for Siakam and Norman Powell. And I don't know how far that team can go because the thing that makes the Raptors so special is that they have a bunch of depth and a bunch of gritty guys. So if you're giving up Siakam, you have no 4. Unless you move OG to the 4 spot, but you don't really want to do that. And now you have no 6th man because Norman Powell is your 6th man. So it'll be a weird deal. I think for the Raptors and I think for the Rockets is a great move because you get a 6th man and Norman Powell who could play the point guard to small forward, and you get Pascal who could be the 4 next to Christian Wood if you put him at the 5. But I think for the Raptors, this is like a lateral move. I don't think this puts them as a favorite to win a championship.
Yeah, I actually really like that move for the Rockets. I think they get good value back for James Harden, as good as you really can at this point. But like you said for the Raptors, I don't know how much better that makes them. I feel like James Harden would be in a similar situation to what he was the past 2 or 3 seasons. It would be him and Kyle Lowry or Van Vliet, just like it was him and Westbrook and him and Chris Paul almost against the world. But one of the next teams that I want to talk about is the Portland Trailblazers. And I think it would start with CJ McCollum. And I was thinking a guy like Gary Trent could be the second piece in that deal and then attach a pick or 2 to it. And I think that would be an interesting deal for the Trailblazers, bring in some more offensive firepower, and you put yourselves right up there with the Nets in the category of teams that have so many weapons, they'll be very tough to guard. And I would love to see that Dame and James Harden pairing.
Yeah, I think Dame and James Harden with Melo, Covington,
Yeah.
Nurkic, that can be a favorite in the West. Like defensively, they'll have trouble, but in terms of offense, they can match any team. Now you have Harden and Dame, who are both top 10 players, top 7 debatably. Harden, I think, is top 5. Dame is like cracking that top 8.
Yeah.
I think that would be a really good move. But for the Rockets, you get CJ, and then who else though? Because CJ is basically doing what Harden does at a very at a lower level, and he's like 30.
Yeah, that was the thing. I didn't know exactly what pieces they could throw in because I don't know exactly what value they have in their young guys or their picks. But if they could find a way to make a deal work around CJ, because that would make the salaries work, I think that would be a great move for the Trailblazers. Maybe not as much for the Rockets, but interesting.
Maybe Anthony Simons and like Harry Giles. I mean, guys
Nasir
like
Little.
Yeah, like Nasir Little, like young guys. Probably they'd have to get. But yeah, I mean, it's gonna be hard to trade for Harden because not only is he getting a massive salary, but the Rockets at this point are being very greedy.
Yeah,
like it's like I think deals that are good deals. Not that I have this knowledge, but it sounds like they're turning down a lot of good deals because they want the greatest deal of all time ever for a superstar player. And that just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, I get it. You want to get the value for your guy, but it takes a perfect storm. And I think that they're getting too hung up on looking at what other teams have gotten for superstars. Like, you can't look at what the Thunder got for Paul George and think that that's a reasonable expectation to ask for back. That was the perfect storm because the Clippers knew they needed to make that deal to get Kawhi Leonard, so they would have given up whatever the Thunder wanted. And that's why the package was so big for Paul George. And it helped that it was the offseason. There was a lot of time for them to gel. So I just don't see them getting that big of a haul back. And one of the teams that I looked at and I thought would have been a good destination was Boston. But when I looked at it, there were no packages that I could make work because I don't see the Rockets saying yes to anything that doesn't include Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown.
Yeah, and I don't think the Celtics want to include Jaylen Brown.
Exactly.
The thing about the Rockets and James Harden is that any team that wants to trade for James Harden has to take into consideration two things. One, his age, right? He's getting older. He's getting past his prime right now. Also, another thing is that you don't make a deal for James Harden unless you think and you're confident that if you make that deal, you can win a championship. The Raptors, I don't think they'd be confident they can win if they made a deal for James Harden. Miami could. The Nets could. The Philly, they could. But I think Philly's thinking about it more so if we have Simmons, Harden, and Embiid, we can win.
But is there any way to pull off that deal? It would have to start with Tobias Harris. You'd probably throw in Matisse Thybulle.
Yep. So exactly, in Denver, they're probably not even thinking they're so confident if they get James Harden. So the only realistic options are the Nets and the Heat and the Sixers a little bit. But the Rockets...
I like the promise of that Nuggets deal, though. I think that they have enough good young pieces, especially starting with Michael Porter Jr., that they could figure something out. And if they added, although it would be a strange fit and they would have to figure out that, I like Mike Malone to figure out a situation where Jamal, James Harden, and Jokic could work.
Yeah, so it's weird right now. The Rockets are in a tough position, but I think if you can get a Tyler Hero in a deal, a Ben Simmons, or even a duo of LeVert Dinwiddie or LeVert Allen or Dinwiddie and Allen, you pull the trigger and you make the deal. But obviously Houston has other thoughts in their mind, and we'll see if a deal does get made.
Yeah, and I'll say not to take anything away from James Harden as a player, but with everything that has come out, I would definitely be skeptical if I was a general manager. I would be worried pulling the trigger on a deal for James Harden, giving up so many assets, especially with the asking price that the Rockets have right now. With everything that's coming out, that's a huge risk. Although it's a high reward type situation, it's a huge risk, and that's something that you could lose your job over if you get it wrong.